So this is a session to take a bit in pieces. For the rest of the day, the excellent overview that both Dirts and Marty provided. So we'll try to now take piece by piece the components of this change process. And so this session devoted to the open banking. It will be co-moderated by myself and Mantas. And we'll start off by asking our colleagues to introduce themselves and what they are covering in their respective roles.
Should I start?
Ladies first.
Yes. My name is Emma Strömfeldt. I work at Swedbank as head of innovation. And what that means for us is both, of course, working with internal innovation culture and so on, but also lots and lots of FinTech partnerships. And that has led me to become responsible also for our open banking initiative that we launched earlier this year. And I have a background from multiple different digital startups and being a startup entrepreneur myself. So I have spent more than 15 years in very fast-moving digital native companies and less than 2 years in banks. So, but this changing this culture is really, really interesting. It's happening now.
All right, thanks. I'm Harri Rantanen. I'm a Finn working in Sweden for SEB in transaction services, which is an organization within large corporates and financial institutions, so the old merchant banking, if you recognize by that name. I have been working as a business developer for from 1st of May last year, 10 years in bank, and before that I've been working in multiple customer implementation, initiation reporting, formats and standards. I'm an ISO 2022 expert. And I work within that also outside the bank.
You need to explain that.
Yeah, it's the financial services standard, and that was a huge debate regarding that even in PSD2. I can go further in details, even though I'm an economist and have a business degree, but I'm really keen on digital IT things. I'm speculating with some cryptocurrencies. I have bank accounts in N26 and Monzo and Ibaku and all of these new banks, and Revolut even. Revolut is really interesting. I really try to experiment myself where the world is going in financial services. And before my time in SEB, I worked for Opus Capital, which is one of the FinTechs. We didn't call them as a FinTechs in that time, but it's now spreading all over the Baltic Rim. So I have my background in developing things for large corporate especially, but now, of course, with open banking, where I have been working in SEB from April, March last year, we have been now also investigating, of course, from the private customer and SME perspective. So really interesting spectrum of things happening. And
for our dear audience, I would like to say that this is not a fireplace chat, so you're not the fireplace. Basically, for this discussion to be lively, we would like your questions and your ideas, and also confront both us and the speakers with what you think about the future and about the digital agenda. So don't be a fireplace, be a fire. So maybe we should start right away, and maybe you could give your thoughts about this digital transformation and PSD2 and what really is about to happen in the upcoming months or years. And some people have been arguing that PSD2 is actually the biggest experiment that Europe is doing with the data of our customers. How do you look on it? And what kind of advantages can the banks and the entire ecosystem get from it?
There is certainly, I can relate to what you just said, because we haven't really seen it in that massive scale before. I think Sweden and the Baltics is a little bit different. In Sweden, we have lots and lots of companies that have already been using the data from banks for many years. So maybe the shift is slightly smaller. But still, I think the debate has been a lot about engaging with smaller companies and with FinTechs and the startups, which is really, really good, which will lead to a higher speed of innovation. It will lead to many more FinTech partnerships with banks. It will lead to lots of benefits for the consumers, easier commerce, all of these fantastic things that we all want. But it's certainly a number of risks that are not yet sort of mitigated in a proper way, such as what happens to your financial information once the difference between having it in one place with the bank where it's safe or having it spread across 20, 50 different entities. It's enough that one of these different entities sort of mess something up, and that data is gone. It's going to be really difficult to trace where it went wrong or who's responsible for this. Another thing that we should touch upon in terms of risk, I think, is the fact that we have been, the discussion has been around incentivizing startups, while I think that in reality what we will see will happen is lots of startup activities, but we also roll out the red carpet for the big American and Chinese tech giants that are coming into Europe, that already have consumer trust, and that will get the European consumers to happily hand over their financial data. And the consequences of Europe for that, not sure. It hasn't been debated enough, I think.
Harry. Yeah, I can resonate via the work that we did last year regarding the how to implement or actually take into account the open banking in our customer segment, LCFI, large corporates, financial institutions, private customers and small enterprises, business planning. So that was a really good example of how difficult the mindset change in the banks are, because the people responsible for the business planning and items for how to steer the bank forward in this digitalization and new challenges, it is really difficult for them to understand what open banking is. So if I try to say open banking is APIs, application programming interface, oh, that's IT, I don't understand anything, please say something else. I said, okay, open banking, we will open up our information for third parties. Oh, that's frightening. We shouldn't do that. We are used to this closed banking, our customers, our products, our channels, nothing else. But then I say, this is about information, sharing information, using external information together with our own information. And then they realize, okay, now we are talking about something, and the information is the new oil, and we have to think about that, how we do the revenue models, of course, by the consent of the end customer, because the risks that Emma was talking about, that's of course something that we have to take care. We saw also in the previous discussions and presentations about this matter of trust. We are, SEB is 160 years old bank, and of course it's not merit and credit anymore that much, but that means the trust. And that's why we should be also really concerned that we do not mess with the customer information. And we should see how the third-party providers, what kind of third-party providers they are, and take care of this due diligence. But on the same time, we shouldn't block the innovations, because that's the big thing which is happening now. And this is really critical for the financial industry overall now, how we meet these third-party providers and also compete with these big players, like you said, from US and China. We really have big concerns in European context how we will manage overall.
Can I add
Absolutely.
to that again?
Absolutely.
To say from the bank perspective, of course, that I think we have a responsibility also to help educate our customers and our users, because there is a big difference between third-party companies that we happily invite, happily share data with, co-innovate together with, and this is all happening on the open banking platform, because we have also done our due diligence towards these companies, and they are a trusted partner, and we can sort of represent this co-innovation towards our customers. That's very, very different. Then, if something goes wrong, the customer can actually come to us and we can say that, well, this was a trusted partner, and of course we take responsibility because we safeguard these processes. But with PSD2 and so on, there are lots of third parties coming to get data where we cannot refuse, where we cannot do the controls, where we cannot, and for the consumer to understand the difference, I think is going to be quite challenging.
But I think we have been talking only about the banking perspective. We need to understand also the regulator's perspective, because what you're touching upon, this is responsibility of the regulator. And if regulator allows everyone, including the fraudster, to come in to my bank account and take my data, including my payment history and my payment patterns, That's the problem of the regulator, isn't it?
Mantas, I think this is a good point where for us, as you were talking, reflecting, we're talking about PSD as a legal requirement and an implementation of open banking. Now, if we look to the discussions that we're both as part of the European Banking Federation, there's a huge disconnect across the Europe where it's safe to say that the Nordics, Baltics are in a different discussion than many other of our colleagues, where it's how do we reach the minimum level of PSD compliance, and here we're talking about open banking. So I think given the audience here, it would be great if you can a bit talk through the segments. How do you see this? PSD2 and the open banking.
Yeah, let's talk about PSD2 first. The scope of PSD2 within account information and payment initiations is this much. Account information, payment initiations in total are this much. Open banking is something that my hands are not enough to describe the scope. So PSD2 is a good thing because it's pushing us forward. But I'm referring to Nordea's Gunnar Berger, who really well said PSD2 is pushing banks to open up for competition. So we have to open up our infrastructure so that the third-party providers can provide better services that we banks may not be able to offer. But open banking is about collaboration, which we talked also here earlier, so that how we can co-create things with the fintechs which are able to create things. If we open up our infrastructure, of course, by consent of the end user, then we can together implement things that we are not able to do. Let's compare to Google Maps. That's a platform provider. And even Google is one of the best innovators in the world. They also admit that they are not able to innovate everything that is can be done based on location information. We must say also in the banks that we may not be the best ones to innovate what can be done based on account information. And that's the relevance, that how we can invite persons and people all over the world to innovate on that critical thing of our daily life called financial services. And that's really important. And one point more is that I just read from UK study. UK is the forerunner country in overall in Europe regarding this, even though they decided to do the Brexit, which is really sad. But anyway, they had a study about that when they asked from normal private customers, would you like to open up your financial information for third-party providers like PSD2 is saying? 91% said absolutely no. Then they asked, would you like to do payments via Facebook or WhatsApp or Google? Oh, yes, absolutely. And Facebook, Google, they are not having their own bank account structure. Only way for them is to do PSD2 type of payment initiation service provider setups. So it's about how we talk about this thing. And regulation is of course good thing in positive regulation means. But we have to also think that how we ourselves in Nordics, in Baltics, interpret the regulation. I created my N26 bank account last summer via iPhone chat in 6 minutes, showing my passport here and there behind my telephone. In 6 minutes, I was a customer in German bank as a foreigner. I can tell that it's not working like that in SEB in Sweden, as a Finn to make a bank account in Sweden.
I agree. I am Lithuanian who tried to make a bank account in SEB. I finally got it, but it took me 2 to 3 months.
Yes.
But in N26, you're correct. 6
and
minutes.
They are not breaking any regulation.
No.
But they are masters of collaboration, these fintechs. I exactly know what kind of subcontractor they use for seeing persons' credibility in 150 countries. So they use a service which is giving them credibility information for making the know your customer much smoother than we do here.
Any questions from the audience? Ideas? Yes, go ahead.
My name is Lala Medin. I'm from the Ministry of Justice, so that's why it will be a legal question. Sorry for that.
No one is a lawyer here.
No one is perfect, I know. But
we have to stop talking now.
The question is actually what you talked about, all the data sharing and for example, as you described that in this N26, the decision is made in 6 minutes and there have been checks in different places, different services. And if a customer gets a negative decision, who is taking the responsibility if that information which is checked has been checked wrongly?
Good point. I don't know. I cannot answer that question.
Shall we
I was
call in
lucky to be
26?
credible.
Yeah. Which I think nicely brings us to your ISO headline that you mentioned, which is that there is so much room for interpretation. Also within PSD2 and other lines of regulation, there is a huge space for the standardization initiatives on the industry side. So maybe you can talk us through a bit of those.
I would actually like to respond to your question before we jump up. Or at least from a conceptual point of view, because I think we've seen technology moving really, really fast, and usually legislation lagging behind. So I think we have a too high belief in the fact that just the fact that I walk in with a passport into a branch office and there's a human there, and that human is going to say, if I'm the person in the... I mean, the room for mistake here is quite high if we compare to sort of modern technology with all the biometrics and everything that they can actually do, which is real time. Then we can still have, we can create a smooth process for lots of people. Of course, if I'm denied, if the technology says I'm not who I am, of course we can reroute and we can have another process and so on. But that's... we can at least sort of soften up the process for a lot of people.
My question was more, when I go to branch, I see a human who has made a mistake, I can sue that human. But if the decision is made by robot, whom am I going to sue?
Ministry of Justice.
Sorry.
I think this topic actually raises very good conceptual question, because how we are identifying customers. Now we are again in this ecosystem. So each bank is identifying separately.
Yes.
State is identifying separately. Each is sitting on data. And concept what we presume nowadays is that each is owning customer data, but we must understand that only owner for customer data is customer himself. And I think this is great opportunity for really partnership as well between private and state, how to create this identification really based on biometrics, more secure, not sitting on data that, okay, this is a stolen document register, but banks hardly can access it. Yeah, so banks need to create alternative list. So this is actually not very wise.
No, and something that can be exported or passported as well, because we have a lot of national built-up identification methods. But how do we share that?
Yeah, let's talk about for a while about that, because we have, of course, eIDAS, which is the standard platform or standard for electronic identification. But still, all the countries in Europe are doing like they want. They have, of course, some of them are eIDAS compatible and some of them are not. So, for example, Bank ID in Sweden is really close by. And of course, if I'm as a Finnish customer of SEB or worker, employee in SEB want to have a bank account, I cannot base that on Bank ID, because Bank ID is given only for actual Swedes. And then the problem here is that the banks are in a key role in many terms of identification and services, electronic services in different countries. And then there are customers and then there are private persons who are not capable of having bank account or bank relation at all. So that we have to solve. And then we have this standardization, because I think that all the digitalization initiatives, open banking included, is based on that how we can do that in a more standard way. So we should have only one single instance of identity of ourselves. Corporates should have one global instance of identity, and then we, as persons, we should have the role and different roles in different entities described also in one single place. But it's really difficult to achieve with the existing way in Europe now. National agendas and initiatives are there. E-identity or residency in Estonia is a good example how we would go further and investigating how that could be expanded. So I know that there are services outside Estonia who are using that type of identity, and now they are promoting that for UK private persons and companies, because they are Brexited. So if they want to remain in EU area, they can acquire that by small price.
I think you're onto something really important, and if we relate it to PSD2 and open banking, from our perspective, when someone comes to us and knocks on our doors and say, "Hey, we want to get this piece of information or this data," we need to verify that there is a customer consent.
Yes.
we need to verify that if you claim you're SEB, how do I know that you're SEB? Sort of what's the SEB identity here? Plus, how do I, maybe not with SEB, but with a smaller player, how do I know that this we have the PSD2 digital certificate, right? I need to know that you're licensed to actually have the right to get this. And I know that each sort of FSA is supposed to keep a register and so on. But all of these things we need to sort of verify before we let this data out. And it's not yet 100% standardized. There are bits and pieces. But we have a regulatory gap, I think.
And all of this in a couple of milliseconds.
Yes, exactly.
Is it easily manipulated? Could it be easily manipulated?
Well, if you measure, then we have PSD2, but we have GDPR, and for the banks,
don't even mention it.
No, but for us, we need to, and GDPR is even more strict, to be honest. So if we need to choose, we're likely going to go with GDPR.
Let's talk about GDPR, sensitive customer data. What about bank account? This is so interesting discussion which we talk every time for international customers, corporate customers. So when we report a bank account statement and someone has paid to corporate account something, can we show the debtor account or not? Some countries are saying definitely not. Some countries in Europe say you must show that because that's part of the reconciliation process for large corporates. So is bank account sensitive data from this perspective? I haven't heard any good answers. Should those countries who are now showing that and using that as a reconciliation method stop doing that if we interpret in European level that bank account is sensitive data? So really simple exercise for the brains.
But then link this back to the question that Emma pointed to, which is that the service provider that will be doing the reconciliation, gathering the consent, etc., will be licensed in one of the EU member states, right? And so again, going to kind of the positions each of our national states then take, like, you know, for example, Ministry of Finance being part of the ECOFIN discussions, for example, on very practical things like whether EBA, European Banking Authority, should maintain a machine-readable register of third-party providers. If they opt not to maintain a machine-readable register of third-party providers, it's very clear what the game will be. The biggest players on the market will be the places where the third-party providers will be licensed and where everybody will be able to cross-check their licenses. And therefore, the responses to the questions that you pose will be of those regulators and the stance that they adopt. So that's going back to kind of the huge potential for us as Nordics, Baltics to actually try to be part of these discussions and not have only the German and the French solutions for the machine-readable registers take precedence. But that's so. How are you? I think understanding all of these complexities, the uncertainties, as a business developer for open banking, both of you, how are you actually taking the ideas and the concepts to the deployment stage with all of this around? Maybe you can take us through some of the specific functions, some of the specific applications you're currently working on.
Yeah, I can tell about this THINK collaboration that we have. So that's one option to take in and FinTech and collaborate with them. They are really good in analyzing the personal account finances, and we made an investment for THINK and continue collaborating with them, and we have implemented some parts of their solution. And now we are discussing with them, should that be expanded to corporate accounts also, and not only for Swedish-based customers, but also for international ones. So that's one way forward, so that we co-create something. And then, of course, we have to consider ourselves at how we prepare our complex infrastructure to be more dynamic on the interfaces so that we can do this type of collaborations in a better way. So that's somehow an IT problem or IT challenge. On the business level, we have a lot of ideas how to go further and different kind of ideas going further from the PSD2. And of course, PSD2 already enables some things that have been a weekday business for large corporates. They are already multi-banking, multinational, so they expect that for their marginal bank accounts where they do not have that much transactions, that the main bank delivers the bank account information for them already. So that has been done for decades based on Swift messaging. So that's not an issue at all. So that's really natural thing for banks also to consider being themselves as a third-party provider, importing in customer information from other financial services and external services. But when we go into further details and what kind of APIs there are already available on the market, not only for financial services but otherwise, then we go into really interesting discussions how to innovate based on that. Good example in Finland is OP Pohjola Bank, who is having their own hospitals, and now they have hireable cars, and they are linking them together. Of course, first of all, a bank running an hospital business seems not to be a really good business model, but they have also insurance policy company. So then you can imagine how they can use that information in good terms based on different kind of personal health information. So we come here into these areas where we have to also think about the good discussion that you had regarding the sustainability of banks and financial services. How we can provide this infrastructure available for services that can benefit out of the financial services information, and vice versa, how we can use that to support a better decision making, applying that with artificial intelligence and giving analytics for the customer instead of the raw data of the bank accounts.
I can mention then how we sort of work with the open banking platform, and we, even before we launched open banking, we still worked a lot with FinTechs. I think last year we launched 4 FinTech collaborations, and that is coming back to different kind of innovative companies that have built something which could be a niche thing, but that we see beneficial for our customers. So we have taken these companies, we have usually embedded them into our services. We have an example of a Swedish company called Mina Tjänster. They are working with identifying all the subscriptions you have on your account data, which is a growing trend. 10 years ago, we didn't have so many things on subscriptions. Now we seem to have everything. It's not just electricity and phone, it's your gym card, Spotify, Netflix, etc., etc. With the average household have 20 subscriptions. They have taken that, summarized it into a short list where you can actually, within now the mobile bank app, cancel a subscription, change a subscription. You know, this is really, all of a sudden you're in control of your finances, you can manage this. This is thanks to a collaboration then between a small startup and a big bank. So this is exactly the type of collaborations we want to have to help increase value for our customers. And but in order to get a few of these, if I said we launched 4 collaborations like this last year, I have met 300 FinTechs this year in order to sort of filter that down and channel that down. And that's also how we see our open banking platform. We will have open APIs for test purposes. Say you can test things in small scale, but very, very openly, because we want it to really have this bubbles of innovations and lots of ideas. And then from there, of course, we need to filter out and say not all of these ideas were brilliant, but we actually need the quantity to get to some that are really, really good and really, really useful for our customers. And then we sort of lift them up in the pyramid here of becoming a tighter partner, more integrated.
I really much like your idea, but basically this is something where still bank decides what's good and what's bad. Is there an opportunity?
No.
There an opportunity to do something that actually killed Nokia once upon a time? Because what killed Nokia was not an iPhone. What killed Nokia was the idea that the customers knows much better what they need than Nokia's engineers. So the question here is the client able to choose what they want or what they need?
One comment, Nokia is not dead. It's
No.
really
It's
feeling really,
it's a
really
phoenix. Well,
Yeah.
I knew it's a challenge to take to the Finn. It's a phoenix. It's a phoenix. This company has been reborn 3 times already.
Yeah, yes, I
So,
know.
but still, taking away from the Nokia and giving back to the
Yeah,
subject.
but to answer that, to say that I would not see it as just the banks decide and so on. I would see it as a win-win, because if you take these, it's also really difficult to be a small startup. They struggle and they have lots of competition and so on. What happens with, if I take the example of Mina Tjänster, they were successful. They had their customer base as an independent app with, a couple of 10,000 users. Once we take them and sort of integrate them, they have millions of users. So for them, it's fantastic to be. It's not. They could have made it on their own. We can just give them a faster access to success in that sense.
But is it possible to make an app store for the banking services?
Yes,
in
absolutely.
the SEB, Swedbank, whatever system?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think for everything, it's going to be lots of niche. If you take the corporate area is even more interesting for that, I would say, because you have so many different types of, we can have one thing that's mainstream, but you will have so many different types of, I'm super interested in Chilean export, and I'm sure there's an app for that. So then this is where open banking is really, really good for really creating this broad base.
One point more regarding this is that, did you know that death ratio for startups is, for common startups, is really much higher than death rate for fintechs? And there is a really big issue regarding that, and that's the fact that usually in fintechs there is one old banker or some financial specialist within the company, even with the high innovators and new kids on the block. And that's why they usually are a little bit more sound on their financial basis than the startups overall are.
But still, what is the death rate of fintechs?
It's less. I heard sometimes that it's about 80% in overall startups and about 50% in fintechs. So it's a difference there,
So
and that's why it's good to know that they have some kind of understanding of financial services. I know a lot of fintechs that do not have that much, but they learn really quickly, and that's something that I'm talking a lot within the bank, that how we should change our mindset internally, because when we do develop things, the really easy way is to go into the comfortable way, doing the process like we have always done, using in-house IT experts, using in-house development. But now in the new world, we are able, with the open API technologies and GitHubs and open sourcing, we are able to use external development resources. But that's a hard way for traditional IT bankers, so that they have to test themselves. What if I buy this service or this external development effort for my product to be available more quickly? What kind of due diligence I have to do? How my compliance is thinking about that? What if that vendor will die in 3 years? So this is a lot of this mindset. But if we don't do that, we will continue the same way. We will do this forecasting evolution, trying to get 5 or 10% more every year, but it will fail some 10 years or 15 years.
It's an excellent angle, because you're coming to the next question. What about, we spoke a lot about the technological shift, but what about the mental shift? Because it requires a lot of mental shift, not only in the banks, but also in the startup companies, because these guys also need to understand how to cooperate with the bigger animals, but also at the customer side. We also need to start thinking other things when interacting with bank, you know, trusted information or trusted service provider kind of thing. Whom can we trust? Whom can we not? Whom can we give our consent to use our data? Whom not? Can you elaborate more on that? What kind of mental shifts are happening?
One good example is this large corporates using treasury management systems or ERPs. A couple of years ago, still, let's say 5 years ago, it was totally impossible to say that, yes, we will run this treasury management system in a cloud-based service. But now I know exactly that the corporates are now moving into totally different approach, and now they are requiring from their vendors, all traditional TMS and ERP vendors, to put their services in the cloud, because they don't want to anymore have in-house installations and auditing of their updates and upgrades. And the total cost of ownership is something that is driving their push for new technologies and new as-a-service-based templates. So that's something that is happening already at the customers, and they are looking for platforms who are able to provide this kind of services for them. And now they are not always anymore directly integrating their systems into bank systems, but they are using already service providers or some kind of third-party providers, so that they already, third-party providers are in a position that they can say that, yes, that bank is really easy to integrate. That is not. Even though the corporate is saying that, yes, but the other bank who is not so easy to integrate have good financial services overall. So we will come into the situation that we are also co-creating in the business models how we can strategically make common solutions, common offerings, so that we both sides gain in a business. And we come back into this easy integration, so that when we use these open APIs, and have more and more services based on that, not only PSD2, then we are in a situation that we can do this collaboration in a better way, because the technical integration methods should be there available so that we can renew the business models together.
Yeah, I would say that there are essentially three things that make up this, if the change or the difference between the fintechs and the banks, if you say it's how you conduct your business, and it's people, processes, and technology. And we bring in, from the bank perspective, I mean, I'm myself an example. I've spent 15 years in a digital startup, or multiple digital startups. We try to bring in as many people as possible that come from a purely digital native background so that they can be triggers of change to many more like traditional bankers. The other thing is processes. I will tell you that the first time we tried to integrate a fintech, that was a little bit of a bumpy ride because our processes were not necessarily arranged for that. It gets faster and faster for each time we do this. We have now gotten sort of they don't like me to call them sort of the usual naysayers, but you know, when we talk about risk and compliance and IT security and legal and so on, we have, but rather than having them in the end, sort of when we've done everything and then we come to them as the jury in the end and they say no, we have really changed the process to say let's include them from start and let them also know that they are not there to say no, they are there to make it possible. They are there to suggest how to make this possible. And that is a massive mental shift that has already happened. I'm super proud of our sort of risk team that really sits in at the table from the start, actually coaching these startups, coaching these fintechs on what they need to do, how they should do things, how they can tweak things in order to actually become compliant and be able to work with us. So that's a massive change to both people, mentality, and processes. And then I completely agree. We need to be very, very open for new technologies, such as cloud and so on. That was also, the first discussion was a struggle. Now it's more accepted. Of course, we have partners that do cloud and so on. It takes a little bit of time, but the more we can merge between fintechs and banks, the better it will actually become for society as a whole. Because you want the speed of innovation that the fintechs have. You want that agile mindset, but you also want the security and the reliability and the trust that the banks have. And I will see, if 4 years ago fintechs were over here and banks were over here and everyone thought that this would be a big collide and so on, we see already that many of the smart fintechs are already working very, very closely with the banks. All banks have massive sort of fintech partnerships, programs and so on. And it's good for society.
Can we take through in terms of the scale and the timeline? If we take even the market more closer, Nordea opted at some point for their own API standard. UK was experimenting with their own. Then, of course, the regulatory technical standards by the EBA, the Berlin Group standard development, the ISO has announced that they will be looking in the API standardization space. How do you see all of this both developing in the Nordics, Baltics, and then the timeline and the scale that each of these initiatives could actually end up having?
How many hours do we have left?
How many do you need?
This is a really difficult question because, like I said, I have a standardization background, even harmonization background. Standard must be there so that we can harmonize things. Otherwise, we cannot do that. So we have to agree on market practice, market stakeholder level, how to use the standard. And we have succeeded in ISO 2022 really well. It's a basement of SEPA. Now even Sweden is renewing their infrastructure to be ISO 2022 enabled in payment clearing and so on. And that's happening all over the world. So in the payments domain, we have done really good work. And then comes PSD2. So PSD2 started the standardization work from a regulatory technical standard RTS way. And from the beginning, ISO 2022 was there in the beginning, so that all the standards should be based on that business model, not requiring XML messages, because everyone knew that API developers will use RESTful APIs and JSON instead of XML. So that was a wrong discussion, and now the final version has taken off everything regarding ISO 2022, which is really bad thing, because still the infrastructure is working based on ISO 2022. When we exchange payment information between the banks via clearing systems, we use ISO 2022. But now the third-party providers can implement something else. Of course, we can steer that in PSD2 scope, and we can put our standardization based on the standard, so ISO 2022 standard, so that the implications on the interfaces will be about the same. But I have access to Swedbank's, Nordea, BBVA, Citibank, UK open banking sandboxes, and I exactly know how different they are already now. So that all harmonization work that we were managed to do with the file-based ISO 20222 communication between corporates and banks will now step 5 years backwards, until we realize that this is not a competition issue, but this is a harmonization issue. I hope that until the end of September 2019, when all this PSD2 should be in production, we have solved this issue somehow. Otherwise, we give again a new opportunity for platform who is doing harmonization there in between the third-party providers and banks, harmonizing and making transparent the differences of the bank implementations.
So in some way, specifically, we look at the Latvian market now with the open banking initiatives launched, we will have well over 70% of the customers on the local market covered by a single standard, if you will, right? Now, what is the shape in the rest of Nordics?
Yeah, there is some collaboration fora going on. I'm leading in Finnish Bankers Association or Finance Finland, one ad hoc group which is now discussing with Nordea and all Finnish operating banks, Danske Bank, OP Pohjola, how many, 14 of banks, how to do this. But of course we have to follow what is happening in UK. UK will go live next week or after 6 weeks for some of the 9 banks that are mandated to do this. So we have to dig in what they are doing. Danske Bank is one of the Nordic banks which is also part of that CMA 9 banks that have to go live already. They are not in PSD2 scope. They do firstly an UK setup, but they are now expanding that really quickly to PSD2 before they do Brexit, and then they will exit the PSD2. But of course, many of the this is really silly when you hear it, but many of the banks are still working in the European area, EU area, so they have to do PSD2 anyway. Then we have Berlin Group, which is German-led standardization forum in Europe, which is now drafting some implementation guidelines. And there are a lot of open issues regarding both of them. But of course, when UK open banking is already going live, they have to do something already correctly, onboarding TPPs, doing this accounting third-party providers, yes, and implementing this account information delivery and so on. So we have to follow up, first of all, how they succeed, what implications they will have, and then hopefully on European level we have to get all these 4 or 5 different standardization initiatives on the same board and see how we can align them together.
So within a bank, are you following all of these? You have to?
Yes.
Or are you making some bets early on?
We have to bet something to start with something.
I would be more pragmatic and say, of course, we want standardization. I think everyone wants standardization over time. But to be pragmatic, we all want to,
experiment and prototype.
No, but we want to have open banking be as good as it can possibly be, as early as possible. And then what happens? Of course, we have a multitude of different APIs within the bank. And for us, they might look slightly different in Sweden than they do in the Baltics and so on. We're still going to take, the pragmatic approach to say, let's launch what we have and to start with, and then let's sort of standardize this over time. So all for that, but I think it's quite natural to say that if you look at open banking, the first 6 months when everyone launches, of course it's going to be a little bit different, because if we would everyone start building everything from scratch, we're not going to have open banking in a few years.
One point more. We shouldn't forget what is happening outside Europe. W3C, which is an organization standardizing many things regarding XML and HTTP, all of these things that we are using daily. All the browsers are based on W3C standards. They released in September already web payments interface, meaning that all the browsers, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, they will have in the browser already embedded a payment initiation module, which all the merchants can easily embed into their services. And that is also really revolutionary. We haven't discussed that at all in European level, but it's happening already there. And when that will expand to use of Google services and Facebook services, even the Chinese services from Ant Financials and Alipay, that will be quite revolutionary. And we might be in a situation in a couple of years that we are not dealing always with the PSD2 APIs, but web payments API within the browser.
Before we go back to another question, is there any ideas? Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Thank you. The first question was here.
On a nerve.
Thank you. Well, still there is a risk that Parliament will not adopt RTSs. How this will affect your project on open banking?
Yeah.
Could it be a showstopper, or you're ready to go forward with the same speed?
Yeah, like I said, we have to experiment and prototype things. Of course, then in that case, we have to wait for different kind of TP, third-party provider licensed registries so that we can do that in a proper way. But already these development portals from different banks that are live, they are using some kind of methods in that kind of interfacing. And there will be always, like I said, PSD2 scope is like that. Account information payment initiation scope is like this. There are already third-party providers, service providers that will not get any license, but we still want to collaborate with because they are serving a vast flora of different end customers of ours. So we have to approve them, but of course then banks have to do a due diligence per service provider without relying on the FSA-based licenses or registries. So this will also go in terms of that. And of course, in that terms also, we can charge for the interface. In PSD2 scope, when it's a licensed third-party provider, we cannot charge on the APIs.
I agree fully.
Hello, Kaarel Eller from the Ministry of Finance in Estonia. I have a bit more general question. PSD2 is not the end of history, and probably in a few years we'll have a PSD3. So I wanted to ask, what do you think will be the next big thing in PSD3, or what is your wish list, so that it can support more innovation in the payment sector? Thank you.
Not sure. No.
I heard yesterday that there is AML5 version coming up regarding anti-money laundering, which is taking care of some of the cryptocurrency wallets. So they will be also regulated somehow anyway. So this is a full of, we are in a business that is really heavily regulated. There we are collaborating with the regulators. But the new technology is a good thing in regulation perspective too. Let's come from the ISO 2022 perspective. There is a lot of things happening regarding that together with ECB, for example. The MiFID reporting from the banks to the ESMA is based on ISO 2022. They really want to standardize and harmonize things also at the regulator side, because again, it's now requiring a hell of a lot of efforts and hands and people, and they want to start using RegTech type of solutions, using AI and blockchain-based solutions, so that we do not send from the banks different opinions what kind of derivative this is, but we hopefully someday will have only one single truth of derivative instance information, and then it's really much easier together with regulators to analyze and see what is the status of this instrument, financial instrument. But nowadays we are still having these bank-specific silos, and we have interpretations of same things. And I really hope that this kind of collaboration with the regulators will go on, because we have to save also in costs regarding the regulation. We are really eager to report things, but we have to do that in a way that is benefiting the processes and costs and operations on both sides.
I'd like to sort of comment on that, just because I think even I'm not going to say a wish list for PSD3, but what I'm afraid of is that the regulations are yet for PSD3 going to lag behind technology. We can see that already today we have sort of voice-enabled payments through Alexa, for example, and we had this incident in the US, which I thought was quite hilarious, with a small girl having overheard her mom order things through Alexa, and this small girl is sitting at home saying, "Alexa, order me a dollhouse and cookies." And Alexa actually does that. And this became a story. This mom had a journalist friend, and this journalist is repeating this on national TV, saying exactly, "Alexa, order me a dollhouse and cookie" on TV, because it was a funny story. and the TV is on in multiple homes in America, where Alexa is on, overhearing the TV, picking up, ordering Dollhouse and cookies. So, like, I mean, I still think technology is way ahead of where whatever regulation is trying to catch up.
So just one more question. We have, Matas, just one quick clarification in terms of the regtext. Are we saying that all the new regulations will be transmitted in XML format or any other format?
No, I'm not saying that, but we have to agree on the language that we are dealing with each other. So that if we have a basement for common language like ISO 202 is offering, why not using that? Of course, how we do the things, it's much more that processes. And like I said, the new technology gives both sides opportunities to make things easier than we do nowadays.
So in a way, the future for the Ministry of Justice is when the law gets adopted in the Parliament, it's transcripted and planted into all the systems directly, right? So that's the future.
Hello, Andrius Balšaitis, Head of Innovation Center at SEB Lithuania. My question is about not only PSD2, but on a broader context of collaboration between banks, among banks and fintechs. No matter probably how big a bank is, the ambition for a fintech, and in order to be successful, it has to be able to connect and collaborate with many banks in Europe, which are, like I heard, more than 4,000 probably in European Union.
Yeah.
And for the banks also, in order to be able to use all the possibilities that fintech world provides, they need to be able to also interact with many fintechs that are also in thousands already probably somewhere. And this, for me, in my head, looks like a new business model for a middleman or middle layer that would create.
They are coming up.
And my question is, if you are already in this business and working together with fintechs, you mentioned a lot of interactions during this year, how well do you see already this middleman has been developed, and what is the potential future? Maybe the contact point for the banks shouldn't be the fintechs themselves, but this middle layer, who should organize all this in?
It depends on what type of partnership it will be. It's one thing if we only speak about payments and API hubs and so on. That we can see, and as long as we're not standardized, that there might be room for middle layer. But I would say for other examples of companies, fintechs that we sort of partnered with and invested in, even if we're a minority shareholder, say, I'd see it as the opposite. We sort of can guarantee the success of this fintech, but we will also be the first one to open the door when this fintech, a Swedish fintech, for example, when they want to collaborate with a Spanish bank, we are the reference. We are the ones that will give them the introduction and open the door and help sort of push them into expand globally. Why wouldn't we? We want to be a good partner to these companies. So I think, but it completely depends on how close that collaboration is and what type of partnership it is.
One point more is that which is part of this mindset change in the banks. I have been promoting that now there will be a new persona when we do this design thinking development for our products and services. Now we have listed, yes, this is a treasury, this is a private person, this is an elderly private person, how we respond to the services and needs of theirs. But there will be a new person, and that's the external developer who is scanning all over the financial services, what kind of APIs are available, and they actually decide on behalf of their end customers that what kind of banks and what kind of APIs they are going to implement. And that's why we have to take care of that in our development, that our APIs are intriguing and they are easily found in different kind of platforms or marketplaces or wherever, so that they can do the integration as easy as possible. There's had to be good documentation, good example cases, and also this onboarding of these third-party providers must be as automated as possible, because also in onboarding, we do not have that much time to spend like we do now in file-based integrations. We can spend a couple of days or weeks, but in this kind of APIs, that should go like this in a couple of minutes. And of course, we have a lot of challenges to make that happen in that time, but we have to aim into that, and that's why we have to take care of that new persona. not only end customers, but these developers.
I'd say that's how it is now in open banking, at least on our side, that you can sign up in more, anyone can sign up and become, we have over 1,000, since we launched 2 months ago, we have over 1,000 users on our open banking platform, because it literally takes 5 seconds to sign up on the basic level where you can start testing things and experimenting and so on. Then if you want, full access to everything, then we do our due diligence and checks a little bit later, but to just welcome you to start testing things, very, very open, very easy.
One final question. So in a way, we're looking at a very decentralized world also internally within the banks, where if we have the trend, if we look at the trend for the data analytics, is that this will shortly be a self-service data analytics by all the employees of the banks trying to analyze on the basis of available data. Now, the world you're pointing to is that the APIs will be in thousands, if not tens of thousands, over the coming years. Pretty much every single employee of a bank has to have an understanding of what they are dealing with, whether they're advising the customers, how they're thinking about their own processes. How are you tackling the challenge of getting everybody up to speed on what are APIs, how to work with them, how to think about the developments?
You have to be an evangelist, the ones that are understanding where we are going. This is like, there was one slide saying that there is no U-turn. There is no U-turn. So if we think that we will manage with the same strategy and politics that we have had for 160 years in SEB for further 160 years, that will not happen. We have to change our minds. We cannot close our eyes from the digitalization that is happening there. And we know that exactly because luckily our customers are having the same challenges. Private customers, small enterprises, and even the large corporates, they are needing for help, and we cannot help them and advise them otherwise than knowing ourselves something about this.
I'll admit that one of my KPIs is actually how many people within the organization have I included in an active innovation workshop. It's not enough to say that they have sort of listened to an inspirational session. They need to be hands-on working with innovation. That's one of my KPIs. And we have multiple evangelists, Geert, for example, and many others. So we absolutely have, I completely agree, we need to work across all units in many forums and active, but I think it needs to be hands-on as well. You can't just tell people how to be different. They need to feel it and experience it and be part of it.
And people working in bank, it's quite funny. When you are at home, you are a banking customer. But when you come to do your work, suddenly you forget everything that you are needing as a banking customer. So you are starting to think from the old traditional banking process perspective. That has to be changed.
Harry, Emma, thank you very much. My co-host Sanda, thank you very much. I think you deserve a big hand.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks very much.